She had been planning the dinner for 2 weeks. The tablecloth was new. She had bought it on a Tuesday, folded it carefully in the store bag, and waited for the right moment to use it for the first time. This was the right moment. 12 years of marriage deserved a new tablecloth. The candles were lit. The wine was open and breathing on the counter. The food had been cooking since 2 in the afternoon. The children were at their grandmother's for the night. She had arranged that specifically. Had spoken to Donna Sonia on the phone with the politeness that always cost her something, because politeness toward her mother-in-law always cost her something, and said, "Could you take Beatrice and Tomas for the night? Ricardo and I would like an evening alone." And Donna Sonia had agreed in that tone she always used, the tone that suggested she was doing Laura a favor she did not fully deserve. But that was fine. Tonight was not about Donna Sonia. Tonight was about 12 years, about the woman she had been when she met Ricardo at 26, fresh from a marketing position at a company in the center of São Paulo, with plans and ambitions and a calendar full of meetings that mattered to her, about the woman she had become since then, about the distance between those two women, and whether it had been worth it. She lit the last candle. She stepped back and looked at the table. It looked beautiful. She looked at the clock on the wall. Ricardo had said 7. It was almost 8. She told herself traffic. She told herself work. She told herself the things she had learned to tell herself over 12 years to explain the spaces where his presence should have been. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below. And that was when she heard the notification. A sound, short, bright, specific. The sound of a message arriving on a phone, not her phone. She had left her phone in the bedroom. On the kitchen counter, next to the cutting board she had used for the vegetables, Ricardo's phone was face up. He had forgotten it when he left that morning. She had noticed it at 9, thought about calling his office to tell him, and decided he would manage without it for one day. The screen lit up with the notification. She could see the preview from where she stood. She did not move for a moment. She told herself it was nothing, a work message, a group chat, something ordinary and irrelevant. She walked to the counter. She picked up the phone, and she read the message. And the candles on the table behind her seemed to burn differently after that, as if the air in the room had changed composition, as if the beautiful dinner she had spent 2 weeks planning had become a photograph of something that no longer existed. Laura Mendes was 38 years old. She had grown up in a middle-class neighborhood in the south zone of São Paulo, the second of 3 children. Her father worked at a bank. Her mother was a school teacher who woke up at 5 every morning and never once complained about it in front of her children. Laura had absorbed that quality without knowing it, the ability to carry weight without showing the effort. She had been a good student, then a good employee. She had studied communications, graduated with distinction, landed a position at a mid-sized marketing firm where she was, by the time she was 25, already managing accounts that her colleagues twice her age envied. She had met Ricardo at a work event. He was in sales for a construction company, tall, confident in the way that some men carry themselves when they have always been told they are the most interesting person in the room. He had approached her at the bar and said something that was just clever enough to make her smile. They dated for 2 years. He proposed on her birthday. She said yes before he finished the sentence. She had been happy. She is certain of this now, in the way that certainty becomes important when everything else becomes uncertain. She had been happy in those first years. The apartment they rented together, the weekend trips, the arguments that dissolved before morning, the slow, comfortable building of a life that felt like it belonged to both of them. Then came Beatrice. Then came Tomas. And somewhere between the second pregnancy and Tomas's first year, Ricardo sat down with her and suggested, gently, with the reasonableness he had always been good at, that it might make more sense if she stayed home for a while. Just for a while. The children needed one of them present. His salary could cover it. It was a temporary arrangement. She had thought about it. She had talked to her mother, who was cautious. She had talked to her closest friend, Isabella, who was more cautious. She had looked at Tomas, 7 months old and already reaching for her face with his small hands, and she had made the decision that felt like love at the time. She resigned from her position on a Friday. The temporary arrangement lasted 7 years, and somewhere in those 7 years, something shifted in Ricardo that she could not name and could not point to and could not prove. He came home later. He traveled more for work. He was present in the house but absent from her, the way a person can stand in a room and be genuinely, completely elsewhere. She told herself it was the pressure of being the sole provider. She told herself it was the age of the children, the exhaustion, the season of life. She told herself the things that kept the silence manageable. She had become very skilled at telling herself things. The message on Ricardo's phone was from a contact saved simply as the letter C. It said, "I can't stop thinking about last night. I keep looking at my phone waiting for you to write." That was all. 8 words into a sentence that destroyed a room that had taken 2 weeks to prepare. Laura stood at the kitchen counter and read it 3 times. The first time, she understood the words. The second time, she understood what the words meant. The third time, she understood that she had known. Not consciously, not in a way she had allowed herself to look at directly, but she had known. The way you know a storm is coming before the sky has given you any clear reason to believe it. She set the phone back on the counter, face down. She walked to the table. She sat in her chair. The chair she always sat in, across from Ricardo's empty chair. She picked up her wine glass and drank and set it down and looked at the candles. She thought, I should blow them out. It's a fire hazard to leave candles unattended. She thought, he's been with someone else. She thought, I should check the food. It might be overcooked. She thought, how long? She sat very still for a long time. Then she got up and went back to the counter and picked up Ricardo's phone again. She knew his passcode. She had always known it. He had never changed it, which she had taken as a sign that he had nothing to hide. She understood now that it could also be a sign of something else entirely, that some people are so confident they will not be caught that they do not bother to cover their tracks. She entered the code. She opened the messages. She found the conversation with C. What she found in that conversation required her to sit down on the kitchen floor. Not because her legs gave way. She chose to sit. She needed to be lower somehow, closer to something solid. The conversation went back 4 months. 4 months of messages, hundreds of them. The kind of density of contact that belonged to something that was not casual and was not recent and was not, by any honest measure, something that had been on the edge of happening. This had been happening. The woman's name, she eventually found in one of the earlier messages, was Carolina. She worked in Ricardo's company, in the legal department, on the same floor as his office. She had been there for 6 months before the first message was sent. Laura read the messages in order. She did not stop herself. Some part of her that was separate from the pain was filing everything, categorizing everything, building a case the way she used to build presentations when she still had a career to build them for. There were messages about restaurants, about hotel rooms. The name of a hotel appeared twice. A place in Higienopolis that Laura had passed 100 times without knowing what it contained. There were messages about her. That was the part that required the kitchen floor. Ricardo had described her to Carolina. He had used words that were not cruel in the way that insults are cruel. They were worse. They were the words of a man who had categorized his wife as a problem he had solved. She's fine. She doesn't ask questions anymore. She's happy enough. I manage her. I manage her. Laura read that sentence and sat with it for longer than she had sat with anything else. She had spent 12 years believing she was a partner in a marriage. She had been in her husband's private correspondence with another woman, something to be managed. She heard his key in the door at 8:47. She was sitting at the kitchen table when he came in. His phone was in front of her on the table, screen up. The conversation open. Ricardo walked into the kitchen and stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the phone. He looked at her again, and she watched his face perform something that was not guilt. It was a calculation. She could see it happening. The instant assessment. How much has she seen? What does she know? What is the best response? He had always been good in difficult rooms. It was one of the things she had admired about him. He said her name, Laura. She did not respond. He said he could explain. She said nothing. He sat down. He put his hands on the table in front of him in the gesture of a man prepared to be reasonable. She recognized that gesture. She had seen it in every difficult conversation they had ever had. The posture of reason, as if disagreement was always her failure of logic rather than his failure of behavior. He said it wasn't what it looked like. She pushed the phone across the table toward him. She said, "I read 4 months of messages, Ricardo. Tell me what it looks like." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him deciding. Then he said it had started as nothing, a friendship, that Carolina was going through a difficult time and he had been there for her, and it had become something he hadn't planned. He said he was sorry. He said he had already been thinking about ending it. He said he hadn't wanted to hurt her. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said she can't stop thinking about last night. What happened last night? He looked down at the table. She said, "You were home at 11. You told me you had been at a client dinner. You kissed the children good night. Tomas was still awake, and you read him half a chapter of his book. Then you came to bed." He said nothing. She said, "What happened last night, Ricardo?" And the silence that followed was its own answer, complete and irreversible. He slept in the guest room that night. She did not ask him to. He went there without being told, which told her something about how practiced the distance between them had already become. She lay in their bed and looked at the ceiling. The candles had burned out on their own. The food she had cooked since 2 in the afternoon was still on the stove and the counter, untouched. The new tablecloth was still on the table. She thought about Beatriz and Tomas at Dona Sonia's apartment. They would be asleep by now. Beatriz always fell asleep quickly in new places. Tomas needed more time, more reassurance. A hand held for longer than should have been necessary for a 7-year-old. He was sensitive in the way that some children are sensitive, the way that makes the world a lot for them. She thought about what she would tell them. She thought about whether she would tell them anything. She thought about Dona Sonia. And thinking about Dona Sonia was the thing that finally made something cold settle in her chest, beneath the grief, beneath the anger. Because Dona Sonia was not a peripheral figure in their lives. She was a presence, constant, deliberate, dense. She called Ricardo every day. She had opinions about everything in their house, everything in their children's lives, everything in Laura's choices. She had never accepted Laura entirely, in the way that some mothers cannot accept that a woman their son loves came before they could vet and approve her. And now Laura sat in her dark bedroom and asked herself the question she had not yet allowed herself to ask. Did Dona Sonia know? Had Ricardo's mother, who called her son every single day, known that her son had been spending nights in a hotel in Higienopolis with a woman named Carolina from the legal department? And if she had known, what had she done with that knowledge? Laura closed her eyes. Outside, the street was quiet. The city that contained 12 years of her life went on around her, indifferent, as cities always are. She did not sleep. The next morning, she woke before Ricardo. She had a habit of this, even in ordinary times. She was the one who made the coffee, who started the mornings, who held the household together in the invisible ways that no one documents but that collapse everything when they stop. She stood in the kitchen and waited for the coffee to finish. On the counter, in the exact spot where she had found Ricardo's phone the night before, she noticed something she had not noticed during the chaos of the previous evening. There was a second phone. Not Ricardo's usual phone. A different model, smaller, older, tucked half behind the fruit bowl as if placed there without thinking, or as if placed there by someone who kept it separate from everything else as a matter of habit. She stood very still. She picked it up. It was not locked. She turned it on. And what she found on that phone had nothing to do with Carolina. What she found on that phone suggested that the affair, the 4 months of messages, the hotel in Higienopolis, all of it had been the smallest thing she had discovered the night of her 12th wedding anniversary. The surface of something she had not yet begun to understand. And understanding it, she would come to find, would cost her far more than a marriage. This is the story of Laura Mendes, a woman who set a beautiful table for an anniversary dinner, a woman who picked up a phone that was not hers, a woman who found, beneath the life she thought she was living, another life entirely, one she had not been invited to know about, one she was never supposed to find. This is episode 1. There is much more to come.